Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Alok, for giving this opportunity. So I think I'm not able to record, so you can record from your end and share it. That's fine. Good. So we'll start. You're recording, right, Alok?
Yeah, recording is enabled, Sridhar. Yeah.
For some reason, it's not allowing.
It's getting recorded from my side. I can
That's
share
fine.
the recording with you.
You can share it. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
So thank you, Alok, for giving this kind opportunity, and I welcome all of you to join me today. So you had a very nice lecture by Dr. Monica last week on the topic of approach to extreme low birth weight, mainly in terms of ethics. She did an exhaustive presentation. My presentation is going to be focused more on the ethical principles in terms of resource limited settings. So we are all quite clear that the boundaries in neonatology are constantly changing, and there is a significant improvement in the outcomes when we look at extreme premature babies, and so to speak, we are stretching the limits of viability. So what used to be difficult for us a few years ago is now quite possible, and we are actually producing very good results in the same aspects. So most of you are training in developed countries, and the resources are not a limitation. So what happens in this setting in terms of countries like India or different countries in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, where you do have resource limitations? So I'll be speaking a little bit about the Indian scene, but actually most of it can be extrapolated to any of the developing world, and some of them are actually much worse than what it is in India at the moment. So this is just to give you the flavor of what happens. I have a few slides, so I will go through some of them in detail, but some of them I'll skim through just to give you the flavor, as I said. So we'll start with a couple of cases. I mean, we have a primigravida mother. She went into labor while in her village, and this actually happened in one of the most advanced states in India, healthcare-wise, in Kerala. Her husband works in Dubai, and she is an educated lady. Her family is literate as well. And she was 39 weeks gestation. She went into labor. So as they would normally, they took her to a nearby hospital. The hospital had facilities to manage normal delivery, but there is no ability to do cesarean there. And unfortunately, she went into non-progressive labor, and there was fetal distress and meconium stained liquor. So the decision was made that she would need cesarean delivery. Unfortunately, there was no ambulance available, and they took the mother in their own vehicle to the nearest town, which is about 1 hour away, and she underwent a lower segment cesarean. Baby had severe perinatal asphyxia and unfortunately passed away on the second day. So this is a full-term baby who otherwise had a normal antenatal period, and unfortunately it was a poor outcome. Of course, it can happen anywhere, but it's not uncommon in the Indian scenario. The second case is a primary mother. She delivered a baby premature at 33 weeks. The baby was a good weight at 1.8 kilos. She actually delivered in a district hospital where there was a special care newborn unit. And this is one of the newer developments which we will discuss. They can give CPAP, but there was no facility for mechanical ventilation there. The mother did not get antenatal steroids. As she was unbooked, she came and delivered quickly. The baby had, unfortunately, severe respiratory distress syndrome. They started CPAP, but the baby did not maintain oxygenation well. There was no surfactant available, and there was no mechanical ventilator in that unit. I mean, these units are going to be equipped for short-term ventilation, but this unit has just attained this special care status, and they don't have a ventilator at that stage. The pediatrician, who had some basic neonatal training, transferred the baby to the nearest medical college hospital by ambulance. It was nearly 2 hours away. Baby was not intubated as the ambulance did not have a transport ventilator, and they decided to transport on nasal cannula oxygen, and they don't have the facility for CPAP during transport either. So unfortunately, the RDS worsened. The baby went into shock and did not survive the transport. The baby arrested en route. So these are very sad stories, and these are not from the 1990s, but from the past 2 years. So it still happens almost every day in the rural settings, and many babies die even before they reach a medical facility. So we still have major factors affecting even term babies like birth asphyxia, jaundice leading to kernicterus, hypoglycemic brain injury, Sepsis is quite rampant as well. It still happens in many parts of the developing world. All of these are quite easily preventable in most instances. As you would all know, extreme prematurity needs the most sophisticated centers, and it's still going to be far low down in the list of priority when we look at improving healthcare as a general status. So this is from 2006, the infant mortality rate illustrated in colors in different countries. As you can see, most of the North America, Europe, Australia, these have below 10 infant mortality rate, which is an amazing figure. And we have the next ring of countries which have below 20 infant mortality, and India currently falls in the light brown category, where you have in the 40 to 80 range. And there are still countries which have above 80. This was a rate which used to be in India when we were students, and that was 25 years ago. And it has improved to say 45 or 40 at the moment. So things are changing in different parts of the world. However, it's unreasonably high in quite a bit of the world still. Coming to the neonatal mortality rate per 1,000 live births. So this is mortality in the first 28 days for every 1,000 live births. You can see that again, the well-developed countries in Europe and America have a line which has been dropping consistently from a reasonable figure of 20 to below 10 in the 2010 region. This is starting in 1990, and in other countries it's starting from 40 odd, and it's now come to 2025, and in India now it's 29 or so. So there's still a long way to go for these countries to reach a good figure, and this is a split up of 2000 and 2010. The neonatal mortality rate split into prematurity related causes and non-prematurity related causes in light blue. So you can see in the dark blue that prematurity, the proportion of the contribution to neonatal mortality from prematurity is similar, but the term babies non-premature causes is significantly high in the South Asian and Sub-Saharan Africa countries still. The neonatal mortality rate in the United Kingdom and the United States was reduced to below 15 per 1,000 live births before intensive care was widely available. And the largest reduction from 40 to 15 was related to obstetric care and simple improvements such as warmth, feeding, infection prevention, and case management. So this is a very busy slide, but obviously it's very interesting because it illustrates the developments in the field from 1940 until 2010 or so. And this is just the neonatal mortality rate for US and England and Wales. So you can see that it from the 1950s, when it was around 20, it has dropped to below 5 or 6 in the current era. And unfortunately, a large part of the world, which I illustrated in the maps before and this slide before, is that they still are above this level of, it is similar to US in the 1960s or even 1950s. So that's a sad state. And you can see the different advancements in medicine. I'm not going into each of these details, but you can see surfactant replacement came, pulse oximetry came, and we have different other advances, surfactant prophylaxis, CPAP as a standard. But majority of the increase, the improvement happened well before the surfactant and the actual intensive care, advanced intensive care that we have these days happened. That is because majority of the babies are not the very tiny, extreme premature babies. So this is a very good illustration of the current status of neonatal intensive care. This was published in the archives in 2016 by one of my seniors from Postgraduate Institute, Dr. Karthik Nagesh. There is a big rural-urban divide in India. 60 to 70% of the population live in villages. Farming is the main agriculture. Agriculture is the main occupation for most of them, but however, the money generation, the income generation is not as high. And so 60 to 70% of the wealth distribution, as well as the healthcare facilities, exist in the urban areas. There are many differences why the urban areas have more focus, because, for example, the physicians and the trained nurses, they may prefer to live in the urban areas for their family's sake. The schools are better there. You have healthcare facilities which are better for your own family's needs as well. So those who live in the rural areas do have some compromise in the care. So that is the reason that the urban areas have more of these facilities. And also the caseload tends to be high, so the profit margins are higher for the private sector. Excellent level 3 facilities are available in the private sector in most of the major cities in India. And you can compare the level of care and the outcome to anywhere in the world. So most of these neonatologists have trained in advanced institutions in India as well as in overseas. Then they come and establish and they train. Many of the training units are available. So when you go there, you would find these units which function very well. And it's not this group that will be focusing on. In the past 10 years or so, the WHO and the UNICEF have driven most of the world governments in these developing worlds to focus on improving the newborn care as a whole. And so the rural and semi-urban sectors are improving as well. And that's why we could see the drop in neonatal mortality in the past 10 years or so. India contributes to 40% of the low birth weight babies and a quarter of the preterm births, as well as 27% of neonatal deaths. The country figure for neonatal mortality rate has decreased from 68 to 29 per thousand live births in the last decade. The contribution of neonatal mortality for the under 5 deaths is still as high as 56%, compared with the global figures of 44%. So you can see here that we have the under 5 mortality rate of 52 per thousand, and infant mortality rate is 42, and neonatal mortality rate is still quite high at 29. So it contributes to a good number of the under 5 mortality still. And early neonatal mortality is the main contributor in the neonatal mortality. So when we look at the NICU levels of care, it's a little bit similar to what we have in different parts of the world. So you can have level 1, which is basic resuscitation and healthy newborn care. Level 2, where we have preterm care more than 32 weeks, and it can be subdivided into 2A and 2B based on whether they're able to give brief ventilation and CPAP support. And level 3 is where the extreme preterm care can be managed. And these can be subdivided into 3A, where you can use the rest of the level 3, while 3B can do high frequency and nitric oxide as well. The difference between the level 2 in Western countries and the level 2 in India, as I illustrated, some of them do not have even basic ventilation. So they can do CPAP, and then you are stuck. You don't have the generalized good standard of care that you get in other countries. The public sector usually caters to the poorer section of the society who cannot afford private care. So if given the choice, you would go to the private sector because you are more in control, the quality is more assured, and it's easier. But the public sector is more for the people who can't afford. That's the way it is. Unfortunately, in UK, for example, the NHS is open to everyone. The standards are very clear. Quality control is assured. You may have a little waiting list for the GP and specialist services, but in general, the quality is quite good. But in India, if you go to the public sector, it's quite a varying quality. The recent changes in the government, there is a general insurance scheme, the Ayushman Bharat scheme, and there are local modifications at the state level as well. There is focus on improving services, as I mentioned, by the special newborn care units. And this push is coming from the WHO as well. So the public sector can provide 3 levels, like the primary care provides essential newborn care like newborn resuscitation, thermal support, breastfeeding, and asepsis. As we'll see later, it also focuses on home care because still around 40% of the deliveries happen at home in the villages. And the essential newborn care can be provided through newborn corners available at the point of birth, and the newborn stabilization units, which are just 4-bedded units providing basic level of sick newborn care. Even though we say sick newborn care, they probably can't do much other than cleaning, keeping them warm, and giving them oxygen if needed. So the special care newborn units, which have been founded in the past 10 years or so, are secondary care units. It started in 2005, so we have around 6,000 of these all over India, and they are usually at district level. 12 to 20 bedded units and 4 trained doctors and 10 to 12 nurses, with provision of 24/7 services to the sick newborn. The neonates who require higher care are referred to public sector specialty hospitals like the medical college hospitals, or to the private sector multi-specialty hospitals. The government initiative now integrates the private sector into this by offering incentives, and they get extra staffing, the extra budget from the government itself. So more and more private NICUs are also participating in this scheme. Of course, the level 3 care is mostly in the larger district hospitals, in the medical college hospitals. Tertiary level care is usually focused on these institutions. And you do have the autonomous central institutes as well, which are the apex of care as far as the quality is concerned. So in the private sector, it's not very well regulated, different quality and different levels of support. Most of the obstetric units are small, they're not well organized, and they provide level 1 to level 2 basic NICU just to support the obstetricians. The corporate and larger private hospitals have developed better equipped NICUs and they are more focused in the larger cities, as we discussed. Cost is one of the key limiting factors in private healthcare. So it costs around 5,000 to 10,000 per day. So it's around 100 rupees to a pound. So you can see that it's 50 to 100 pounds a day. A preterm staying for 50 to 60 days could have an expenditure of 1 million Indian rupees. So which is like 10,000 pounds. It's not too much in terms of when we look at pounds, but when we look at the per capita income, there is a huge disparity in different states of India. So roughly in the richest states, it's like 2.24 lakh Indian rupees. And in the poorest state, it can be even 30,000. So it's quite variable. And in terms of dollars per capita income, even though the GDP in India is approaching the fourth in the world, the per capita income is abysmally low. So because of the huge population, so it's like 70% of the population will be below this line even. The recommended NICU bed strength per million populations is 30, and India would need at least 100,000 level 2 neonatal beds. The current numbers that we have would be far below this. So we do have affordability as a problem. We do have the access to good healthcare as a problem because the country doesn't have enough beds. So after the recent changes, about 6,000 special care units are there in different parts of the country provided by the government, apart from the private hospitals in the various towns and cities. The greatest challenge has been in recruiting and retaining the trained medical and nursing manpower, and home delivery still constitute a good number. So there is a focus in the National Rural Health Management Scheme on home-based newborn care by accredited social health activists. So you train the local health workers, so to speak. They are not formally trained to that, but they are trained to a reasonable level of care. They are a social health activist, and they become an integral part of the NRHM, and they are trained, they are paid to some extent by the government as well. The special care newborn unit and the newborn stabilization unit are also integrated to support the system. You can see a significant urban-rural divide when it comes to the neonatal mortality rate, even in the countries where the urban rates are quite low. Kerala is still quite comparable to the Western states, the Western countries, while the other states, you can see that it goes as high as 42 neonatal mortality in the villages. And because the villages have the majority of the population, it affects the total neonatal mortality in the country as well. So the country as a whole is here, and you can see 29 to 33. In terms of proportion of the GDP for the healthcare budget as well, compared to the other countries, India has just 1.29% of the budget allocated for health, while US, for example, is 14.3%, and Germany 9.5%, UK 7.5%. So for a big country like India, where you have loads of changes to happen in the healthcare, this is abysmally low input in terms of the budget for the healthcare. So it's going to take a while to bring it to the higher standards that we need for the whole of the country. So this case is very interesting because it was projected 3 years ago, and it brought extreme prematurity into the highlight. A newborn was erroneously declared dead in an upscale hospital in Delhi, the Max Hospital, and this was November 13, 2017. The doctors handed over the baby and the twin brother in a plastic bag, and they told both the babies were stillborn. Actually, it was not that both were stillborn. One was living, but the parents could not afford the 5 lakh rupees that was quoted to manage the babies. And while taking the babies for cremation, the family noted one of them was still moving inside the plastic bag. So this came up a lot, and actually the hospital was penalized immediately. It was the hospital functioning was suspended for a period of time. Then there was a inquiry, and the medical council thankfully understood the issue and said it was that tragedy is an issue of miscommunication and misunderstanding, because they don't deal with resuscitation of these babies in a common way. The way the people took it was not probably the way it should have been done. So they should have been kind, they should have been empathic, they should have explained clearly. And affordability, unfortunately, plays a big role in the equation, but they shouldn't have released the baby before the baby passed away. Even if you are giving comfort care, the respect should be given for that. So that is missing, and that's why focus needs to be there on training the staff in such issues as well. The committee's inquiry found that the standard medical procedures were followed till the discharge stage, but however, The plastic bag was given on parents' request when they were discharging. They had given in a towel, but for ease of carrying, they put in a plastic bag, apparently assuming that the babies were dead. And there was no death certificate given, and that's what saved the hospital finally. The Indian Medical Association took it seriously, and then they brought out guidelines which would relatively make it clear for the medical fraternity. So obviously less than 20 weeks is abortion, and between 20 to 24 weeks is a non-viable child. It's not advisable to resuscitate, and comfort care should be given. So it is clear that the comfort care was stressed for this group. Between 24 and 28 weeks, the chances of survival is less, and it should be decided on a case-to-case basis. After 28 weeks and 1,000-gram birth weight, every effort should be made to ensure that the child survives. So the benchmark in India now, if you don't resuscitate a 28-weeker, you will be penalized between 24 to 28 weeks. If you have 24 to 27 weeks, if you have counseled the family, you have taken their views into mind. So it's a little more than what you would see in the Western countries. But still, in the private sector, the approach would be similar to what happens in Western countries. So there was a nationwide survey. So what are the outcomes reported from India? And this was published by the PGI as well as Rainbow Hospital Group. And this was in 2014. So we are about 10 years away from the time this data was collected. So things are improving even better than what is displayed here. So they basically surveyed 70 main units. Some of them were teaching hospitals, some of them were private NICUs, and it was a good number of admissions. Less than 28 weeks, they had about 3,120 babies, and they showed a median survival of 44%. So which is a good survival when you look at less than 28-week babies. The range was 18 to 60 for the interquartile range. Less than 1,000 grams, 58% survived. I mean, the difference is because you have more growth restriction in Indian NICUs. They also mentioned the training facility available. So more and more trained neonatologists are coming out every year. We have the DM neonatology program, which is for 3 years. We have the DNB neonatology. So Indian Academy and NNF fellowships are available as well. And we have nursing fellowships as well in neonatology. So there was another article again involving PGI by Professor Kanya and Professor Praveen, and this was published in 2013. They had 255 extreme low birth weight babies born in the study period between 2009 and 11, of which 150 or so were admitted to the NICU. The remaining babies could not be transferred either because of non-availability of beds or lack of consent from the parents due to financial constraints. And this is in a center where the care is hugely subsidized. So it's supported by the government. So the charges are not anywhere near as high as you would see in the normal private hospitals. So financial constraints play a role even then. And of course, this is mainly because of the poor prognosis. So you have to prioritize the available beds for the babies who would do better than these babies. And 78 or 52% were discharged alive. Here it was gestational age mean of 29 weeks, because this was ELBW babies that were studied, and 52% were IUGR. So that's one of the reasons why you see the gestation was 29 weeks, even though the weight was less than 1,000 grams. They showed a clear correlation between the increasing weight and the survival. Less than 800 grams fared worse. And in terms of the extremely preterm infant, we will look at some of the ethical considerations. This will be applicable to any country, but we will focus on the developing countries subsequent to that. So gestational age is a primary factor in determining the approach to extreme preterm infants. And previously there was a situation where we couldn't treat very premature infants. So we had the helpless feeling, and the natural way to go was comfort care. So you explain to the parents, and the comfort care is provided as best as you can. And the other considerations include the birth weight, gender, and singleton or twins, use of antenatal steroids, active resuscitation, whether the babies you're viewing as active resuscitation or not, presence of chorioamnionitis, congenital malformations, PROM, all these can influence the outcome as well. So there is an interesting view by Reader where there is a distinction between rescuing and continuing or taking over creation. So if it's an older child who is unwell, for example, and you're resuscitating them, you're rescuing them. But in an extreme premature baby, you are kind of taking over or continuing creation, because it's an artificial incubation. When the baby is supposed to be in the womb, they are being looked after in an external environment. So it's taking over a creative process. So they argue that the approach ethically can be different. This is difficult to justify given that they are living in every way. There is also a great deal of medical uncertainty in the outcome. It's not possible to prognosticate with a degree of certainty for the individual patient, whether it is prior to birth, at the time of live birth, or for a sick neonate in ICU. The possible reasons for conferring a different status on extremely preterm infants include the belief that the brain is a privileged organ, the degree of medical uncertainty in terms of outcome, the fact that the family will deal with the psychological, emotional, physical, and financial consequences of the treatment decision. So this is a very important factor because whatever we decide now, the family has to bear the brunt in the future. The extreme preterm baby looks more like a fetus than a term newborn. The initial lack of relational identity because the parents haven't really interacted with the baby, and especially when it's a fetus, they already know that it's a fetoid looking baby. Their attachment may not be as much, especially in the extreme preterms. And these babies are technology dependent because if you're not supporting them, they would not survive. The timing of decision making around delivery, which can be a very stressful time for the family, for different reasons. So the ethical principles considered in decision making include the best interest for the baby or the family, a reasonable person standard, the good enough parent, and the harm principle. The harm principle comes in the very tiny babies where the prognosis is not good. So the pain and the different procedure related discomfort that the baby goes through may be not justified. In terms of models for decision making, you have the zone of parental discretion, the not unreasonable standard, and the shared decision making model. So all these have a little bit of overlap the way you put it. So the degree of medical uncertainty and the facts that the parents will deal with the consequences of the decision making highlight the importance of providing a wide band of discretion in parental decision making authority. So the zone of parental decision making is affected by the degree of prognostic uncertainty. The more the uncertainty, the wider the zone that you give. So the parent's opinion has a bigger weight where the prognosis is poorer or you're more uncertain. The not unreasonable standard looks at it as three different areas. You can say the same, we will look at the guideline as well as to unreasonable to provide treatment, which is a clear-cut zone, say 22 weeks. And it won't be unreasonable to either provide intensive care or not to provide intensive care. This is a gray zone, and the gestation would vary depending on your unit statistics. So most of the 23-weekers would fall in this category. And unreasonable not to provide treatment, this would be 24 weeks in most countries, but in the developing world, you may have to stretch it to 26 to 27 weeks. In terms of the shared decision-making model, the healthcare professional shares the best available evidence, discusses the options, and helps the parents discern their own values. When the treatment is clearly beneficial, a baby's right to treatment outweighs the parent's decision-making authority. But when the benefits are less clear, the parent should decide for their not yet competent children. Transparency and regular communication with parents will invariably strengthen the therapeutic relationship and minimize conflict. So when it comes to management of extreme preterm, we have the excellent BAPM guideline, and this was in 2020. I'm sure all of you would have reviewed this, and Dr. Monica clearly mentioned some of these. So I would not go into the details of this part, which is mainly for the developed countries, I mean. But when it comes to ethical aspect of decision making, we have the 4 standard pillars we learned from medical college onwards. We have beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice. So the main portion that comes when it comes to the developing countries, where you have lack of healthcare resources or competition for healthcare resources with more, babies who are more likely to survive, those who are going to have a better outcome, then the justice will play a role as well. So in other parts of the world, it may not be as significant. So in resource limited settings, the resources may be limited due to poor healthcare resource availability of healthcare in relation to the population size, affordability or the per capita income, and the overstretching of available resources as in a recent pandemic. So all these would apply in a country like India or in African countries. So this is an example of how the recent pandemic had led to rationing of resources even in the developed world. And some of you may have encountered it firsthand as well, that the older people were not given priority and they had goals to maximize the benefits. So saving the most lives and treating people equally as far as possible. and promote and reward instrumental value and give priority to the worst of. So these are different principles. So this is rationing in healthcare, and unfortunately it happens quite frequently in the developing world. Coming to the size of the prematurity problem, this is the last part of the talk. So we have an estimated 15 million babies born too early every year, and nearly 1 million children die due to the complications of preterm birth. The inequalities in survival around the world are quite stark. In low-income countries, half of the babies born at or below 32 weeks die due to lack of feasible, cost-effective care. So these are babies who wouldn't die at all in the developed world. And in high-income countries, all these babies would survive. More than 3/4 of the premature babies can be saved with the feasible, cost-effective care, like essential care during childbirth, basic hygiene, proper assessment of the mother and delivery with avoid asphyxia, provision of antenatal steroids, kangaroo mother care, frequent breastfeeding, antibiotics to treat the newborn infections. In the lower income countries, on average, 12% of the babies are born too early compared with 9% in the higher income countries. And prematurity rate can be as high as 18% in some countries like Malawi. Within countries, the poorer families are at higher risk. As I said, in India, the affording people will go to the private sector, they would get better care than those who go to the public sector. There's a dramatic difference in survival of premature babies depending on where they are born, and more than 90% of the extremely preterm babies born in the low-income countries would die. So this is a fact. And less than 10% of such babies would die in high-income countries. So the survival is increasing progressively in the high-income countries, while in the low-income countries, this is unlikely to change for the next 10 years at least. So the WHO action report on Born Too Soon is a very interesting article, which you can all go through. And this gives you the picture, the breakdown of the premature babies, the 15 million babies, of which 1.2 million are in the developed countries, 3.8 in the middle income countries. So this group does reasonably well. Among the remaining 10 million babies, nearly 5.6 million are born at home. Majority are doomed to die. And the 4.4 million premature babies, they can be cared for in facilities they don't have the full facilities, but kangaroo mother care and things are helping the bigger babies to survive, the bigger premature babies to survive in these settings. So South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa account for almost 2/3 of the world's preterm babies and over 3/4 of the world's newborn deaths due to the preterm complications. Almost half of the preterm babies are born at home, and even for those born in facilities, essential newborn care is lacking. So this is again to say that the bigger babies are sometimes dying needlessly, and in terms of the extreme premature babies, they are only about 5% of the premature babies. Their outcome is quite poor in these countries. There is inevitability about their death when it comes to these countries. So they are taken more as an extension of a miscarriage. The countries with the highest risk of death and the most feasible deaths to avert are still experiencing the least progress. So as I told you, what happened in the US and UK in the 1950s is still not happening in many parts of Africa, for example. The history of neonatal care, we explained already that most of these happened before the neonatal intensive care was established. So obviously the priority for public health should be to save the babies who should not die otherwise. And this is the basic need of the pyramid of healthcare in terms of newborn care. So term babies, 120 million, and they need just the essential newborn care. 12.6 million premature babies, of which there is a different level of care needed. So we have to definitely save the babies below this, and the top 780,000 babies, whole world, it's less than 5% of the total premature babies. They need the intensive neonatal care, and this is the last part which will be fixed in terms of building the neonatal care in a developing country. So we have to fix this part. We have to prevent any death below this line and then move on to the top part. So the extreme prematurity is going to figure in this top section, and understandably so. We are not talking of the private sector. As I mentioned, they do have the ability to manage the top part. Out of these 780,000 babies, some 100,000 babies would be going into the private sector category. They would probably do equally well as in Western countries. So the low-cost measures with high benefit like antenatal steroids, training on non-invasive ventilation, kangaroo care and breastfeeding, training nurses in addressing infection prevention, timely detection of infection and early antibiotic treatment, teaching and involving the families more in the routine care. So this will spare the nurses valuable time when it comes to a busy NICU as well. So these are some of the things that the WHO has highlighted. For hypothermia, we have different levels of thermal care. For cord and skin care, hypoglycemia, hypoxia. So you can do basic things, essential care for all babies and extra care for the premature babies. So kangaroo mother care is very important in these settings, and ability to feed babies by cup feeds, for example, may train the families to look after the little more mature premature babies at home in a safe environment. So these are also essential parts, again stressing on clean birth kits, delayed cord clamping, chlorhexidine application of the cord. We don't do it in Western setups, but in developing countries, the risk of infection is high. You could use an emollient on the skin because you won't have the incubator with humidification. You could have basic resuscitation available as well. And kangaroo mother care needs a special mention because it was developed in the 1970s by Dr. Edgar Ray as a solution to incubator shortage, high infection rate, and abandonment among preterm birth. So they had a inevitability approach, while he showed even babies 800 to 1000 grams can be nurtured in those units with the mother acting as the incubator for the baby. And now, of course, kangaroo mother care has obtained wide recognition all over the world. It reduces mortality rate and also other benefits like breastfeeding, improvement, weight gain, mother-baby bonding as well. So that's why the developing countries are adopting the same as well. The WHO recommends vitamin D, calcium, phosphorus, and iron for the very low birth weight babies when they go home as well. So there are equity gaps between the rich and the poor, public and private sector, provinces and districts within the same region, and rural, urban, and peri-urban population. Unfortunately, the world is not equal. There is always a variability in the available resources. So we have complex facility-based interventions, and they tend to have a higher level of inequity than simpler interventions that can be delivered closer to home. So the immunization and antenatal care, for example, is more widely available, while higher disparities exist for the skilled attendance coverage. And birth in a health facility is more than twice as likely for a richer family. And we do need lots of nurses and midwives with skills in critical areas, but still the number of such trained nurses available is not high. And in many Indian states, the peripheral hospitals have developed a dedicated newborn space, which we discussed earlier, to improve the care of such babies. So the last part is just to look at what we can do to prevent premature birth in the first place by improving antenatal care and the essential parts of the newborn premature babies care, which can be done with more focus from the government, some training at district and regional levels, and also improve the basic support for the babies with respiratory distress syndrome and so on as well. So comprehensive neonatal care where the capacity allows. So this part is most likely to be achieved at the late stages. So to conclude, resource limitation and healthcare inequalities will not be removed anytime soon. And we have to prioritize care according to the expected outcome. Rationing of care, focusing on high effectiveness measures that can be achieved early should be the focus. In private setups where the facilities are available and the parents can afford, we can discuss the approach to resuscitation beyond 24 weeks as we do in the developed world. Of course, the follow-up availability, if the baby has a neurodevelopmental problem, is going to be less than what you would find in other countries. So this needs to be considered. The long-term cost implications of a handicapped baby has to be considered as well. In the public sector, unfortunately, we need to accept the compromise situation, but improve the care as best as we can. So we have to improve the babies who survive with the minimal, not sophisticated interventions to start with, and then we can consider improving it for the more intensive care requiring cases. So I hope this gives you an idea, and if there are any questions right now, we can discuss those as well.
So, Dr. Sridhar, thank you so much for an absolutely amazing overview of how we approach things in countries like India. In particular, I think from our perspective, clearly what you've been able to give us a really good flavor of is the fact that there is a huge inequity in resources, that are provisions that can be provided at a level where I would say you can provide equal care to babies in all parts of the country. It's absolutely impossible considering how the healthcare infrastructure is. But actually, despite that, I would say that the work that's being done by our colleagues, in public and private hospitals, even in a country like India at the moment, is fantastic and is growing all the time. One of the questions that members from our audience had were, so clearly Western guidelines, in my opinion at least, for resuscitation, I don't think we can actually use them or apply them in the context of the healthcare systems in developing countries. Do you think that's a statement that's okay? I mean, do you think certain aspects of them can be applied?
As I said, I mean, if you take the private sector, you can apply most of it. If you have a corporate hospital with a level 3 NICU, you have the full team, they have all the equipment you need. So they would go about it mostly the same way. They have all the facilities, they have a pediatric surgeon, they have ROP, they can treat retinopathy, and the 24-weeker onwards have started to survive. The cost is a factor, but insurance coverage is improving as well. So if the parents are affording, they go to such centers, and then these guidelines would apply there. So you do have a big divide. And this would apply to say 10% of the deliveries. 80 to 90% would not go for these centers because they cannot afford such care. They would go to the smaller regional centers, which may not have all the facilities, and so the outcome is going to be more compromised. And they would not follow Western guidelines because they cannot have all the facilities that you need. And the government, when it makes the governing bodies, would have the same approach when it comes to reviewing such cases, because they cannot hold you negligent when majority of the country would be doing the same.
That's really helpful. So we have one more question from the audience at this particular point, and that is a focus on kind of legality below 28 weeks. So for legally not resuscitating a baby, one of the questions was, would it be legal not to resuscitate a baby between 24 and 28 weeks if the parents did not want resuscitation in a country like India?
So the Indian Medical Association statement after the case, I think you had put a blog after that case, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So obviously, the Indian Medical Association came up with that statement, which kind of protects against the legality. Of course, you can offer the care between 24 to 27 weeks, but you won't be legally faulty if you offer comfort care because of lack of availability or lack of affordability, even below 28 weeks. So 28 weeks is a cutoff in 1,000 grams birth weight.
That's really helpful. So we were discussing a case at one of the presentations that I did yesterday, and exactly this kind of scenario came up, where we discussed the implications of a couple from a high-income country coming to India and having to deliver in an extremely low-resource setting where she can't be transported out. And the discussion focused on the legalities of, if the parents didn't want resuscitation, how we would manage that situation, say, under 28 weeks. And I think we all agreed that it would be perfectly legal for us to support comfort care in that particular situation for that particular family. So we have another question, which relates to resuscitation, say, for the more preterm babies. So experience with resuscitation, obviously, and the diversity means that for babies over 28 weeks of gestation, care is provided at the SNCU level. We're keen to kind of know, are there neurodevelopmental studies in how those babies are doing? My impression is actually they're doing well, and morbidities at that rate, mainly ROP, but other morbidities are quite low because of breast milk use and kangaroo mother care.
So a lot of IUG are there. I mean, so it's protective to some extent on many of these aspects. And even though when you go extreme preterm, IUGR affects your neurodevelopment negatively when it comes to 29, 30 weeks, because they have less illness as a whole. The respiratory pattern is different from what we see in our babies. So because they tend to be less sick overall, their outcome tends to be better. So the below 28 weeks, if they're IUGR, we know that SGA is a negative neurodevelopmental predictor. But in the Indian scenario, for the babies 28, 29 weeks, and the same, there are many studies from different hospitals, and my friend Srinivas Murki has done lots of studies on early discharge, starting feeds from day 1 onwards, and so on, almost full feeds from 28 weeks onwards from day 1. They have successfully discharged babies like 30 days for a 28-weeker or even less.
That's amazing.
There is always a risk, and you wouldn't take that risk if you are a medico-legal setting, because if a baby chokes at home, you're liable in a Western setup, and in Indian setup, cost factors come in as well. So the crowd, the cost, the bed availability, everything puts pressure on you. And so we wouldn't imagine sending preterm babies home before at least 34 weeks, but sometimes they send home by 32 weeks. And I've seen mothers coming here who have delivered in India. They have been discharged when the weight was 1.4 kilos and they are about 31, 32 weeks with Palada feeding at home. They're not sucking their feed. So the resource limitation makes it difficult. But for those who are going to the bigger centers, obviously most of the Western guidelines are followed, and the insurance companies would respect these guidelines as well when it comes to payment.
That's really helpful. So we have another question from the audience. Just in terms of providing CPR to preterm babies, you know, there's a little bit of a debate on the provision of compressions and adrenaline below a certain gestation. So irrespective of care in developed countries, what's your own practice with regards to providing compressions and adrenaline? Do you accept the gestational cutoff, or do you look at each individual case on its merits? If they...
The disclaimer here is that I have not worked in India since 2002. So I have been in UK and then I'm in UAE, but I'm quite in touch with the Indian sector in terms of attending conferences and interacting regularly with colleagues there, and also following these news articles. And regarding the neurodevelopmental outcome, the cohort that I presented from PGI, they had a 5-year follow-up, and they're looking at publishing a 10-year follow-up as well. And they have a good neurodevelopmental outcome reported, though I didn't present it here. In terms of chest compression, obviously, when I was in UK, it was 2010 to 12 region. We weren't that aggressive with the 23 weekers. Only recently that trend has changed, and at 23 weeks, we wouldn't do chest compressions if we are clear about the gestation and the baby was below 500 grams. And I would still hold the same belief 24 weeks and above to some extent. I mean, I wouldn't give adrenaline probably at 24 weeks still. So that's my approach at the moment. But 25 weeks and above, we would try it.
That's really helpful. I'm just going to ask Gautam. Gautam, do you have any questions?
No, actually, no. I was able to relate to Dr. Sridhar's talk because, like, I'm working here in India at the moment. Like, we pretty much follow the same approach in managing any preterm babies here also. So, the one question that I had was, I think it was answered whether we can extrapolate the Western guidelines here. I think it needs to be seen in a case-by-case basis.
That's really helpful. Charu, do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you for the talk, Dr. Sridhar. The main question from my point of view that in India, it's quite challenging in view of not just resources, education, etc. As you mentioned that we would be more concentrating on late sort of preterm infant than the very preterm infant as such. But the difference in your private sector is quite significant compared to the government sector. Is there any government policy or sort of approach to sort of levelize the more funding, more resources at the present state? Any sort of Indian Medical Council, anybody is sort of promoting this or presenting to the Indian government?
The last 10 years, things are improving. And because it's showing an improvement all over the world, in Africa and South Asia, WHO has a big role to play in guiding these programs. So they are going stepwise. And when I was a medical student, we had focused on term babies, trained birth attendants, preventing birth asphyxia, improving breastfeeding. And then they have moved on to the special care newborn units in 2005 onwards. And now the linking the insurance schemes, which allow the private hospitals to get benefits from taking the poor patients. So there is a certain proportion of poor patients they need to take if they come for care with you, and the government could subsidize and pay you. It won't be the same rate that you get for your private patients. So there is a move in the right direction. It's not reached the stage where you would call it a level playing field at any stage in the near future, because unfortunately poverty, the GDP is increasing a lot in India. The per capita GDP is changing as well. It's increased, I think, 45% in the past 7-8 years. But at the same time, the inflation is going high as well. So we have to take that with a pinch of salt. Poverty is something which, unfortunately, is going to be there for a while. So we have to accept this inequality till it's eradicated, and it applies to any poor country in the world.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Kiran, any questions from you?
Yes, sir. Good evening. Actually, I would like to ask Dr. Sridhar a question. So, I am working in Nepal, right? So, I'm a pediatrician there. So, our main hindrance in treating neonates would be financial or resources point of view. So, what kind of ethical difficulty would Dr. Sridhar would be facing while treating these neonates? So, that would be that is my question. So, what kind of ethical dilemma or ethical issues he is facing?
I told you about the issue of justice, where you have the distribution according to what the baby would be able to get. And I mean, I know it's hard to say I won't give you care because you are not able to afford, but it does happen. And that's what happened in the case when they discharged this baby against medical advice. And all these against medical advice cases happen knowing fully well that the baby is not going to survive when they leave the hospital. But unfortunately, that's the way it works. Ethically, it's not acceptable, but sadly, it happens.
I think that's an absolutely fantastic and a very, I would say, honest overview of the difficulties that we face in circumstances of working, even in a middle income country like India. I would say very similar experiences when I worked there as a postgraduate, and I would say visiting my old hospital in Indore, I think very similar questions still being asked. We were resuscitating babies at that time, mainly above 28 weeks, but survival for those babies was extremely poor. I think we're a little bit better at it at this particular point, but clearly the infection, the resource related problems, they still remain. And, I can't emphasize enough how much that gives us insight into the fact that we've got a lot of resources in the NHS when we look at preterm care over here in order to look after babies at extremes of viability. I don't have to think of the cost of nitric oxide, whereas for somebody working in India, the cost of whether you can even actually afford surfactant is a major thing. So I would like to take this opportunity, sir, for thanking you. I am so grateful. Such an enlightening talk for us. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank all the participants, including my colleagues in the neonatal unit in Southampton. Thanking you. Thank you, sir.